My audio wasn't on. Nice job, Mr. Connor. Pat yourself on the back there. Good morning, McGivney. I hope you guys are having a great Thursday. So hopefully a good first week back on the horse. Things are going well. If you had questions, just email your teachers. That's what we are here for. Anyways, we're going to jump right in and get started on this thing. Let's we're going to start with a prayer today. Got a short one for you. If you watched my morning update that I recorded yesterday, it's the same prayer. I like it, though. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Lord, help me to remember that nothing is going to happen to me today that you and I together can't handle. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Important to keep in mind. Take things day by day. Keep chipping away. You know, I feel like a hockey coach right there. Go in, battle in those corners, dig pucks, get pucks out, get pucks in deep. Keep battling, boys. Take things day by day. Let's jump over to classroom. And I'm going to run through the notes this morning. I guess I can actually jump over to the chat, see what's going on. Thanks, Chris. Everybody needs to like this video, or apparently you're going to get the Rona. So those are some encouraging words. All right. Let's jump back in. The first set of notes was from yesterday, 4/15 Wednesday. Let's pull these up and look at them. And again, if you pull these up in Google Slides, you can see that I leave speaker notes for you down in the bottom that further explain these slides that are just pictures, in case you were like, what am I looking at here? This is the start of a new unit for us, the judicial branch. It's the third and final branch of the government we'll talk about. After we do this one, we'll do your Constitution tests, and by then you guys will be pros in all three branches of the United States government. The judiciary obviously involves judges, featuring at the head of the branch is Chief Justice John Roberts, but the weird thing about this branch is he really doesn't have much power compared to any other federal judge. His vote on the Supreme Court is the same as any of the other 8 associate justices. The only special power he really gets is that he gets to preside over the impeachment of a president. Other than that, there's not a lot of special features to being the Chief Justice. You also can have more aides if you're the, not like the disease. You're not going to get like HIV because you're the Chief Justice. You get more aides to help work for you, like more staff, those kind of aides. The Supreme Court building, here it is. It was constructed in 1935, and oh yeah, our government sure does like those Athenian and Roman type, architectural features. We got columns, we got, lots of little intricate stonework here. Very Greek. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land. It features 9 justices who serve for life. That number could be increased by Congress. Historically, it hasn't always been 9, but it is now, and has been for quite some time. So that's underlined because it's on the test. Know that there are 9 justices who serve for life. Once you're in for as long as you'd like. Now, a lot of justices do retire in their 80s these days, but recently Anton Scalia, he served until he died. Served until he was, thrown in the ground, so to speak. So you can serve for very long lengths of time on the Supreme Court because there is no limit to your term. The Chief Justice is the highest ranking judge. It's currently John Roberts and has been since 2005. The president is the person who nominates these people to the Supreme Court. So President Trump has nominated 2 of the justices on the current Supreme Court. They were both approved by the Senate. If the Senate didn't like that, Donald Trump's pick, they could have not approved the candidate. And that nearly happened with Brett Kavanaugh because he was the one who apparently partied a little too hard in his days at Yale and may have sexually assaulted someone. They didn't really get enough evidence, so he was approved by the Senate despite that story coming to light during his confirmation hearings. The Supreme Court's the only court created by the Constitution. All other federal courts, for example, there's a federal court in St. Louis. It's a district court. Those other ones were created by the Congress just as needed. So the Supreme Court is laid out in the Constitution. It says we will have a Supreme Court. all other courts can be made by Congress as they see fit. So as the country's grown and our population increases, we have created more courts to handle the more people, more crime, more cases. So we've just created more and more federal courts at a lower level below the Supreme Court as needed. Decisions on cases are made by a majority vote of the justices. And that's the same for other federal courts. There's 9 of them. They make it an odd number, so there's not a tie. So most of the time you'll see, a 5-4 vote or something like that. The majority, the 5 justices who felt one way, they win. That's how the court is decided. The Supreme Court is the highest authority on constitutional law. Their opinion is final. So if they say this law violates the Constitution in some way or form, that's final, unless a later court decision reverses that decision. We'll talk about that later on, particularly with segregation, how in Plessy versus Ferguson, the court ruled separate but equal is fine. A later Supreme Court in 1955 with the Brown versus the Board of Education, I think that was 55. Somebody year check me on that. Might have been 54, decided that no, the previous court got it wrong. Separate but equal is inherently, discriminatory and deprives people of their 14th Amendment right to equal protection under the law. So the Supreme Court is the highest authority on any question about a law violating someone's rights. Might jump over to the chat again, see what's going on. Got some folks in here. Thanks for joining, guys. I appreciate that. It's nice to kind of do this thing live, but again, these are always pre-recorded so you can view them at a later point. But I appreciate you guys jumping in the chat live in case you had questions. Makes it easier for me to field the questions. Cool. Let's jump back in, get through this thing as quick as we can here. These are the 9 justices that are currently on the Supreme Court. There's speculation that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she's having some health issues. She is probably going to retire pretty soon. Or perhaps, I hate to say it, she's old. She might die, which is unfortunate to say. But Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there's speculation she might be on her way out. So President Trump might be afforded the opportunity to nominate one more judge to this court. He's currently nominated these 2 guys on the back corners here, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch. The conservatives of the court are led by this man here, Clarence Thomas. He's the most conservative and right-leaning justice on the court. The Chief Justice, John Roberts, he's kind of a right-leaning moderate. So although he identified as a Republican and was nominated by a Republican president, George W. Bush, he's kind of in the middle on a lot of issues. The liberal side of the court is led by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is why the speculation about her retirement, could shift the balance of the court on key cases like maybe even Roe v. Wade and abortion in America. Sonia Sotomayor, seen right here, she's also one of the liberal judges. Brett Kavanaugh, he's the most recent addition to the court. Despite him hilariously saying, I like beer. Do you like beer, Senator? During his confirmation hearing, they approved him anyways. And he's actually been kind of in the middle. So he's had a successful career as a federal judge, and now he's at the peak of the game, the highest court in the land, and he's actually so far been kind of in the middle, kind of a moderate, which was surprising. The west side of the course, west side. That's this is a sad attempt at humor. Let's just forget that ever happened. The east side of the court. I guess I don't know how you do east side. I guess it's maybe that. East side. The front facade of the court features some statues that we'll look at in a second. The back of the court, I'm guessing, is probably where the judges park and come into the building, and their staff members and people that work in the building. The Supreme Court building actually has a basketball court in it, making it the highest court in the land. It's a terrible joke, but at least I tried. The Contemplation of Justice. This is one of the statues. It shows kind of the pensive, fact that a judge has to make decisions that are tough. The authority of law. Judges have the ability to impact people's lives, send them away to jail, their livelihoods, shut their business down or something like that. And, they remind citizens of their responsibility to obey the law. Here's the old Supreme Court chamber. It's no longer used. Here's the old Senate chamber where they used to hear and confirm Supreme Court nominees. Here's the current Supreme Court chambers, and you're like, I've never seen this before. Well, there's a big reason for that. It's because it's illegal to film or photograph Supreme Court justices while they're hearing a case. So you won't see any pictures of the justices in here. I believe there's one like sneaky picture from back in like I think the 40s that some guy managed to snap without anybody seeing him take the picture. That's it though. You're not going to find any other pictures of the judges sitting in their 9 chairs here. The conference room is where the magic happens. Cases often take, months, maybe sometimes even years for the court to come up with a majority opinion, for 5 judges to prevail and say, this is the way. The justices will often write their opinion on the case and present it to the other judges in their conference room before they present it to the rest of the courtroom and then the public. The Supreme Court Library. It's got all their previous rulings. Any other documents they'd find interesting. There's 2 kinds of courts in law. In America, there's state courts, which handle most of the cases. Most cases start in a state court, whether it's a civil matter, like a contract dispute, or a criminal matter, like somebody stabbed somebody at the Walmart. Each state has its own Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court of Illinois is, the Supreme Court of the United States is always above any of these state courts. So our Illinois Supreme Court is below the federal courts. Specific cases are heard in federal courts, and cases could be appealed from a state court into a federal court should the federal judge accept the appeal. So that happens from time to time, but most cases would have original jurisdiction in a state court. They would start in a state courtroom. The Illinois Supreme Court, here it is, up in Springfield, and a case from the Madison County Courthouse, a lower level court in Illinois, could be appealed up to the Illinois Supreme Court, and if there was still a question of constitutionality of a law or somebody's actions, it could then even go all the way up to the Supreme Court of the federal government. So yes, the courts are all shreked up. They got layers, just like an ogre. There's the slides from yesterday. Pull up the ones for today. Let's hop over to the chat here. All right, still got some folks hanging in there. Thanks. Nobody's got any questions, I guess. All right, picking up again where we left off. National supremacy. Federal courts and laws will always have supremacy over a state court and law. So no, Alabama can't just decide we're bringing back slavery, because that would violate numerous court decisions by the Supreme Court and also numerous federal laws and also just the Constitution, the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. So no, states can't decide, oh, we don't like the Constitution, we're going to make a law that violates it, because no, it'll eventually end up in a federal courtroom where it'll be overruled and basically shot down as null and void. So this comes from the Supremacy Clause, which states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Judges on federal courts, their opinion matters more than any state judge. The states are bound to the federal Constitution and the decisions of the Supreme Court. If they violate them, just like, southern states resisting desegregation, what John F. Kennedy and, previously before him, Eisenhower did? They sent in the National Guard and said, if you're not going to desegregate your schools, we're going to send in the National Guard and make you desegregate your schools. You are in direct violation of a federal court decision on Brown versus the Board of Education. So, yes, state laws can't violate the Constitution anyway, or they will be cast down. Federal powers. So, yes, Uncle Sam's ripped. He's like Dave Bautista. He's super ripped. The state government would be more like Jeff Hardy. Not as ripped, but still has some power. You guys probably don't even know who Jeff Hardy is. That's an older reference for you. The judicial review. Judicial review is the power of the government to decide the constitutionality of an act of government. This would include laws and actions. Only the Supreme Court has this power of judicial review. And it's their main check and balance on the other two branches. If Congress makes a really, really dumb law that violates people's rights, like if Congress made a law that said, sorry, everybody has to be Jewish now, that law is obviously unconstitutional, violates our First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court would hear a case about this, new everybody's Jewish law and cast it down as unconstitutional. It would then be null and void. Nobody'd have to follow it. The founders intended for the court to have this power, but they didn't write it in the Constitution. Whoopsie daisies. That's kind of a big mistake, but whatever. Madison's not perfect. Hamilton even discusses the idea in the Federalist Papers and says that courts should have this as a check and balance. The court, not only laws from Congress, they check and balance the president. If the president does something that's deemed unconstitutional, the courts could basically, censor the president, and it would probably go then into an impeachment scenario. So it acts as a check and balance, and it balances mostly Congress, but also the president a little bit. This was established in 1803 in the case of Marbury versus Madison, which is what your worksheet from today is about. The case featured William Marbury, who was appointed at midnight, the last day of John Adams' presidency. He decided to make the midnight judges a thing. He said, on my way out of the presidency, what would be real cool? How about I nominate a bunch of guys from my political party, the Federalists, to stack the federal courts in our party's favor? The new president, the incoming president, Thomas Jefferson, thought, that's really dumb. I don't think John Adams should have been able to do that. He's taken advantage of a little gap in the system here, and that's not cool. So he tells his Secretary of State, James Madison, don't send this judge, Marbury, his appointment to become the judge. He was actually just a businessman. He wasn't a judge prior to this. So Madison said, all right, cool. I just won't mail his letter then. It was still sitting in the, the John Adams White House. And Madison said, all right, I guess I just won't mail his letter of appointment to him. So Marbury finds out about this, and he finds out that James Madison is withholding mail that he's supposed to receive, and in that mail would be a nice, comfy judge position that paid really well. So Madison's kind of, screwing with him here, so Marbury sues him. And it starts in the Supreme Court, which was odd. The court ruled that, first off, they shouldn't have had to hear this case, that it should have started at a lower level court rather than in the Supreme Court. And they also ruled that the Judiciary Act of 1789 was unconstitutional because it put courts, particularly the Supreme Court, in charge of forcing people to send mail. The court said, we're not supposed to have this power. We're not supposed to be enforcing laws and forcing people to mail stuff. We only act as, the interpreters of the law. That's all that Article 3 says we do, is we interpret the law. Nowhere in there does it say the Supreme Court has to force James Madison to mail a letter. So the court actually cast down this previous law giving them this power. Chief Justice John Marshall said, Madison, you don't actually have to deliver the letter if you don't want to, because we can't force you. We're not even supposed to have this power as the Supreme Court. Madison hangs on to the letter. He doesn't send it to him. So Marbury goes back to Maryland and resumes his banking operations. The original Chief Justice, John Jay, not to be confused with former Cardinal outfielder John Jay, he served a pretty brief period here, but was quite influential in his short time because he was a Federalist, so he set the first Supreme Court up as, Federalist-leaning rather than Democratic-Republican-leaning. Chief Justice John Roberts, he's had the job since 2005, and he's still pretty young. He's only 65 years old. So when it's all said and done, this guy may challenge John Marshall for the most years served as Chief Justice. John Marshall, I believe it was like 30-something years. It's an incredible time. So John Roberts, he's already in 15 years, and he's only 65. Most judges go until their mid-80s. So that would give him possibly, an additional 20 years of service here. So some guys take this lifetime term very seriously. Who knows how long he'll stick around. Judicial review works in this format. Congress passes a law that sucks. The president signs the bill into law, maybe even knowing that it sucks, but hey, guess what? It's a law. A citizen realizes this law violates my constitutional rights, and, challenged the law in court. These suits appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court rules that the crappy law that we started with, was unconstitutional. This can take years sometimes. For example, segregation in the United States was in effect for a whole long chunk of our history before the Supreme Court finally ruled that it was unconstitutional. The first law struck down in Marbury versus Madison, the Judiciary Act, was actually in effect for nearly 14 years before the Supreme Court said, this law is actually unconstitutional. We're not supposed to have the power to force people to mail stuff. So that law was in effect for nearly 14 years before they struck it down. So that's how judicial review works, and it is occasionally a slow, grueling process. All right, jump over to the chat. Still got some folks in here. Appreciate that, guys. That's really it for today. Let me check Classroom, see if there's anything else in here. The Marbury versus Madison worksheet is pretty easy. I'd say this is not really junior level work. This is maybe something I'd give to freshmen. So hopefully not too challenging. But it is what it is. There's some fancy words in there. Writs of mandamus, which is basically, that would have been the letter of appointment. So shouldn't really be anything crazy in there. That's really it for today, guys. So have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. My time slots are Tuesday and Thursdays from 9:10 to 9:40, I think. So that's my new time slot should I choose to stream. I could always pre-record a video and include that on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But if I'm going to live stream or possibly mix it up, I'm probably going to Zoom at some point just to interact with you guys face to face. But it'll be Tuesday, Thursday. That's my time slot. So it'll tell you each day in Google Classroom if there's a synchronous component that you need to attend. That's it. Peace.